I was thinking a little bit about which one of you pointed out for me yesterday, and I think that's a good place to begin. I'm deliberately not mentioning any names, but I think it's a good place to begin with expectations of where we are in the work. And in this, if I have any expectations of where you are in the work. And I would say 5 or 6 years ago, yes, I was very ambitious with this project. I had a lot of ambition on all of my students' behalf, but I learned over the course of time, as you also learn, and if you are working within psychotherapy, that everybody will get there in their own good time. There are different processes, there are different ways of approaching the inner work, there are different ways of getting to that point where the process makes sense. And it's not always obvious what we're doing when we're doing it. It's not like we can follow some kind of cookie cutter template, or you just have to do this and this. I know I built it that up that way in my teachings, but the matter of the fact is that life is messy and human life is messy and the inner processes are messy and they have their own internal map. The psyche works from its own level of readiness. It works from what it wants to work with right now. And some levels there is a lot of resistance, and other levels it's easier to get there. We have different abilities to work with our emotional spectrum. Some emotions we are more equipped and better at working with, others we're a little bit more foreign to, or we have avoided them due to childhood responses where we have learned this was okay, this was not okay. And the emotional spectrum and the psyche in itself is like this instrument that needs to be played on the right tangents for certain processes to initiate. So let me give a practical example. If we, for instance, are not feeling comfortable in being angry, or perhaps have too much anger, the not feeling so comfortable about anger is mostly a feminine trait, but there are males that have that one. But males also have the other side, where anger is the more or less the go-to emotion compared to the other emotions that could be there. Of course, this is what we call emotional intelligence, but it's also neurological. And it's due to the fight and flight mechanisms. It's due to the way the brain is built up. So there is a neurochemistry and neural architecture and the emotional field itself. And then, of course, the environment we grew up in. So there are different factors that allows us to unfold different levels. But back to the anger thing, and I'll talk from it from a female perspective, because there is a difference between learning to express anger and learn to hold anger and express it in an assertive way. And it goes for both. But some females have difficulty with anger. Instead, they choose grief or depression or sadness because that's easier. The response is less threatening. And with that, that's easier to work with other people instead of getting angry and putting our foot down and put up our boundaries, because that's what anger is about. Then we have gone untrained in the anger management department, whereas males have perhaps exercised it too much, and then it has become too over-exercised, and then it gets to the go-to emotion instead of a full other range of emotions that can be expressed. So our work here is, when we work with emotional patterns, they are unfolded through the spectrum of emotions. And if we have not unfolded certain levels of our emotional spectrum, then there are certain patterns that keeps themselves dormant. They're kind of hiding away. And when we then try to get into a specific pattern, for instance, if we have learned anger is not a good idea, crying is easier, then the sadness will open up all the patterns that are related with sadness and the processes of sadness and how that unfolds as a psychodynamic. But we have not opened up everything that's bottled up, so to speak, that is related to anger. Or if anger has been our go-to emotion, then perhaps emotions of kindness or other similar types of more conducive, not that anger is not conducive, but it's a tool, but it can become a very explosive tool. When it's untrained, it can be very explosive. When it's overtrained, it is also very explosive. So it's this balancing part of how do we access certain patterns that are kept dormant in our field. And the reason why I bring that up is because Some people say, nobody here particularly, but I'm just saying some people, or I could use as an example, when we work psychodynamically and when we work with our emotional field, it is like a kind of a harmonic instrument, and all emotions tie into different patterns. So the first step when we feel blockages and when we feel I'm not really getting any further, then that perhaps is because we have exhausted all the access points we have through the emotional spectrum within the limit spectrum that we have. We have decided, as I said again, through different defense mechanisms and childhood experiences, that this is the scale I have. This is how I express emotions. And then the rest are kind of untrained and dormant. If we're not used to anger, then the first time we flip into that one, then, especially for females, it can become super explosive. And in that one, it can render us very kind of unpleasant at that moment. And afterwards, there will feel this feeling of shame or regret because it was so explosive and we hadn't trained it. So that's also a process of learning to deal with anger and how the energies of anger is similarly as to deal with if we have been used to just being the one that goes out and yells loud and become aggressive or whatever, then the moving into kindness or some kind of inclusive behavior can be just as threatening and feels just as unsafe, and where I'm not on safe ground here. I don't really know how to deal with this kind of emotion. But these emotional triggers are important, not just as triggers into trauma, which is could be part of some of the patterns that are more severe, but also triggers into dormant patterns that technically, if we use the Jungian perspective, hold levels, fragments of our full structure that we technically were more or less born with, again, within the framework of our, what we could call kind of withborn tendencies and our DNA and the way our brain has unfolded, which people will, in certain systems, will call karma. Others will call it this kind of weird lottery of the DNA of mom and dad that has come together in a specific way. So we are born with certain traits, but nature and nurture plays in together. So we are born with certain traits, but our childhood environment not only expresses what type of genes that are turned on and off, that's epigenetics, but they're also administering what kind of emotions that we are playing and have to play with. So that's a bit of a process to give some explanations to when you are feeling stuck in some of your processes, where you perhaps have excelled in the patterns that are behind grief, the patterns that are behind sadness, or the patterns that are behind shame, or whatever the patterns are. Then just pay attention to some of the ones that you have not excelled in. And at this point, this kind of self-scrutinizing, looking in and wondering, how many emotions do I actually have? Do I have the full spectrum? And what are all of these micro levels of the emotions that I might not have entertained, that I might not have unfolded? And with that are, quote unquote, depriving myself from accessing certain emotional patterns that are blocking for specific levels of vibration. Because that's what the emotions are there. They are kind of an overlay of the original vibrational pattern. The original vibrational patterns, we know, that goes with the heart field, is the one that activates the different timelines so we can cleanse them out. Is that one that puts things in oscillation so whatever is clogged can shake itself loose. So in this, when we feel that we have not achieved what we want to achieve, then sometimes it's also good to go in and ask ourselves the question, is it because that I have not investigated my emotional spectrum enough? And then you'll ask, okay, how do I actually get into anger if I'm not angry, if there's nothing that angers me? Well, that's a very good question. Then you can work with a more subtle version of it, perhaps frustration. Or if there are self-destructive tendencies, because sometimes when we can't express anger, we turn it inward and become self-destructive instead. So we might not exhibit anger setting boundaries, but we are chewing away ourselves. We are chewing on our own legs, so to speak, because there's a hurt, there's a disappointment, there's something that happened where we wanted to be angry, but we couldn't. And that anger has to go somewhere. That response has to go somewhere. And if it can't go outward, it goes inward. And I know this is simplified, but there are some of these dynamics. So in a way, depression is a way of not having set boundaries, but had the need to do it, but didn't have the opportunity, or it was not allowed, or it couldn't express itself, or it was too complex. And in that way, it was easier to turn it inward, and then it began to chew away as a kind of a reversed stress, a kind of a reversed anger. That's how I will look at depression, which is a little bit weird because depression is, in a way, it erodes things, but it's built in with patterns of shame. It's built in with the patterns of not feeling good enough. And perhaps that is why the anger has not come to expression, because there's a fear of if I already doesn't feel that I'm good enough, and if I don't feel that I belong here, then I definitely do not dare speak up or get angry. And then instead of having that, setting up the boundary, then it turns into the depressive dynamics instead of I'm not good enough, and the schemes that we have that kind of feeds this loop of self-destruction instead of setting up the boundaries and pushing away and saying enough, I'm not taking this. So putting up boundaries in an assertive way is tied into self-worth and I forgot what the English word is for it. I will call it self-reliance, trusting in our own capacity, self-esteem and self-worth, not necessarily self-confidence or this kind of that many hollow people have that actually doesn't have a lot of self-esteem or self-worth, but they pretend they have a lot of self-confidence. I got this, when it all comes down to it's just the what we call empty barrels as a kind of the big drumming of it makes a lot of sound, but there's not really any filling within the barrel within the container. It's just an empty container. It's just a lot of hot air. All right. Here, if someone has a question right now, I think that would be a good point or a good place. All right. So what I'm here saying is that when it comes to the stagnation in the work, there is the emotional aspect of it that we can initiate in some type of self-inquiry by learning how the emotions play themselves out. And for some, that means to go to a therapist that can help us in doing so. And for others, it means studying books about emotions and how they express themselves, because technically each emotion is a kind of neurochemical or electrochemical component. So in a way, we can activate some of these emotions. And I'm going to use a little new age trick that I used to have, or what I did, because in my own process with back in 2004 or something, I was still within the traditional new age paradigm at the time. But I recognize that emotions are chemistry. And that means that they are built up of similar patterns like we find in nature as well. The chemistry that we have in our body is similar to the chemistry we find in rocks. And yes, I'm going to talk about crystals. So what did I do when I kind of felt when I was looking at, I got stuck and I didn't know what to do? And this is a different way of working with crystals. I know some of you will say, yay, I love to work with crystals. For me, crystals, of course, we know what I'm saying about crystals. I talked about that in the transition sciences. They are technically not to be used to this. It demands a level of humbleness. They are not there as a kind of for our service. But if we work with them from the idea of alignment, of coherence patterns, or a kind of correlation, something that matches our body chemistry, the different crystals can open up to that if we place them on I used the chakra system at the time within a specific chakra ideology, but the two most important places where you can use this is the heart field as well as the solar plexus. And with the solar plexus, that is on top of where you have your gut, that network extends out to many different levels of your system. So we don't have to work with it as chakra. We can also work with it as part of the peripheral nervous system. It also goes with food. So food can amplify different ways of bringing up energetic sensitivity. We know that already. Those who turn vegetarian, they get a larger sensitivity. Those who turn vegan, they get even larger sensitivity. So that's a way we can also play with food to support certain processes and change our diet to sometimes shake loose. That's why people sometimes go into fast or do different ways of working with specific types of foods for a certain period of time to change the body chemistry. That will then allow for other patterns to shake loose, which is also a possibility that will then create a sensitivity towards a different type of vibrational pattern, because body chemistry affects our emotional field as well as our vibrational field and allows for different types of energies to circulate through our bio-emotional field. And I'm saying it that way because we know the psychosomatic, soma is the body, psycho is the psyche, the emotional field, and these things are connected. And if we at the same time do energy work and meditation that kind of integrates the brain into the process where we enforce it by either visualization, or the request, the energetic request to work with certain levels and communicate with our body, either through hands-on, as you got from the basic energy work, or you are working with an emotional visualization of something you want to access, or you can listen to music. Some do that to activate certain levels of emotions. So there are many different triggers we can use to amplify some of the things that we can't access. It doesn't have to be in deep theta state. It can actually be just within the normal human realm of tools that are available. When I used some of the crystals, it was the way that I aligned with them when I, for instance, if I used rosa quartz on my solar plexus, then it was because that kindness that is in that quartz, that nurturing kindness, that's how I see it. I didn't look up in a book and say, oh, this is what it means, because I always kind of, yeah, that's way too much. A crystal can't hold that. So that's human projections. But what it can, if we take them into our hands, we can then hold that crystal that we feel drawn to. That's the first step. There is a connectivity. So we take the one we feel drawn to, we hold it in our hands, and then we amplify it to unfold its information pattern. And then we ask, what is there that can be aligned here, as in kind of not talking to it as a little being, because it's not, but communicate with what is it that has kind of gone into this reciprocity. In a way, using the principle for the law of reciprocity to say there's something in the external here that matches something that wants to unfold in the internal realm of my existence. I don't know what it is. So I'm holding the rock and I'm investigating what that is. And then I put it on my solar plexus, which is where I put the rosa quartz. And then I amplified it with my hands. And then I worked through the chemistry, the bonding, the what we call the mineral level. I didn't work through the psychological concepts that people have imposed onto this. I actually avoided that altogether, because that's a huge field of distortion that the rocks can simply not carry that human emotionality. They are mineral based, but they have crystalline patterns, and these crystalline patterns can work hand in hand with the holographic energetic system that we have behind our physical structure and activate certain nodal points in that crystalline pattern that matches certain levels of our biochemistry. I know this is very advanced, but that is to take it away from the psychological spectra and put it into what the rock actually can do for us. And then once we kind of feel, now I got the pattern in my solar plexus, now my solar plexus knows what it is, then put the double hand position on there and amplify it and say, well, what is it that needs to be revealed? Does the answer come right away? No. Sometimes it takes amount of time, it takes repetition, especially if it's a pattern that's very dormant. So it means that we have to hold our hands and do it for an extended period of time, learning to lie down and do that focused, concentrated energy amplification without falling asleep. And in that, begin to build up that chemistry, that type of crystalline pattern that will allow us to access some of the emotions that we might or might not have felt so comfortable with exercising or didn't have room to exercise. I know this is very sciencey, but this is working with the holographic energetic principles behind things that are complex information systems that we can bridge together through our consciousness. And by putting our awareness onto it and using the healing energy, we build that energetic bridge that is necessary for the holographic architecture behind the rock and behind our body via the biofield to work together. So that's a way we can amplify our body chemistry by using crystals for that matter, and choosing different types of crystals, and other types of crystals we simply don't engage with because we learn to see that their pattern connects to unfortunate side effects, no matter whatever the book says about crystals. For instance, obsidian. There's a lot of people, ooh, I love that one. That one that links you directly to the 8th dimension and into the void. So avoid that one by all costs. There are other rocks that you can use in that way. So we have to understand what we're dealing with. If you want to go with saying, well, the properties of the 8th dimension, you can use an opal instead. That's the original 8th dimensional conducive type of energy. So there's also a dimensional aspect to the crystalline pattern between the different rocks. And we can ask, why is that? Well, technically, that's because the holographic energetic architecture behind our world, as you remember from my old videos, quite a lot of the minerals we have, aside from coming from the stars and other places in the universe, got here by big rocks that then planted in that seed and connected to the different dimensions where these asteroids came from. There are also crafts that have been grounded here, and they have become part of our soil, our holographic grid, and by that we can access the different dimensions, again understanding the true properties of both minerals as well as heavy metals and other forms of elements that we can use to amplify a certain spectra of our crystalline structure. And I'm not here talking about the Sirian B crystalline structure. I'm talking about the crystalline bonds that are behind all minerals and elements that are part of our reality field. So that's how we can do it. But I strongly advise that if you are untrained in understanding what type of dimension and what the mineral itself holds, then do the safe ones. Don't begin to experiment with some of the newer ones that have come up that are from different dimensions that we don't want to engage in. Some of the ones that are very, I think it's Moldavite, and some of the new ones that have come up, they are a no-go. And just because they amp up the price doesn't mean it's better. And just because certain people space out and get a lot of weird experiences, that could be due to their or genetics. And some of these people are perhaps not really from our solar system, but comes from other places and are part of the transition that our solar system is undergoing as different types of nodal points. And they can use these rocks to activate their DNA, wherever that comes from. But I can't recommend that on the bat, so to speak, because that's not my configuration. And these rocks, whenever I look at these, the side effect I get from that is within the negative spectrum. So for me, I'm not activating using that. So that's another way to work with the crystals, which in some ways will train a kind of, because many of us have worked with crystals in one way or another, so our system is already kind of aligned with it, including that in the food we eat, there are some of the same elements, so our body can process this type of mineral correlation pattern or link up reciprocity between the holographic energetic architecture behind. Where I want to go with this little lecture here, aside from that, to give an idea of how to spark to life, is this self-reflection and allowing to scrutinize and look at yourself not from a sense of I'm not good enough and why am I so bad and why can't I make this work, but actually from an understanding of that certain things have been allowed to be unfolded and other things are dormant. So the best way to look at this is first to explore what you know you are and what you have and what is possible for you to work with, so you get the dynamics and the meta level of how to work with emotions within the ones that you are feeling safe about, the ones that you are used to use, and then begin to see, can you transform them, as you know, from the psyche as energy and the psyche as transformative processes and the psyche as balance, where you get in and have this understanding that part of the work with emotions is to learn to transform them, to clear them of whatever's there, to work in depth, to get rid of whatever trauma patterns there might be, or defensive mechanisms, or whatever there's there of hurt and all of these things. So that's part of the introspection that happens first. Once that's cleared, then these areas can begin to vibrate up and begin to create that energy that allows for other patterns to surface. So that's another way to go through in psychotherapy or in inner work or in meditation work or whatever we feel is useful for us. For some, it's what we call cellular releasing therapy, that is typically either massage or body therapy, somatic therapy. There are different ways we can work with these tools to unfold what is stored on a cellular level within the emotional field. And when we talk about the mental field, then of course it's not as much to unfold the capacities in the brain to begin with. It is actually to learn to silence it so we can begin to observe how the brain actually works and what it's focusing on and which type of narratives that we have. So these are the narratives we investigate to find new narratives, reframing the narratives that are more conducive, as I talked before, instead of looking at what we haven't activated with big shame, then looking in and say, well, it's dormant, I haven't used it, so I can't really blame myself for not being able to access them. And with that, we then take on the training hat and say, but I can train myself to get to these emotions. I can, via specific techniques, I can access them. And then I'll have to learn how to access them. And once I've accessed them, then I have to learn to unfold them. And once I've learned to unfold them, I have to learn how to use them in the most conducive way. And once I master that, then I'll learn how to transform them. And then I'll learn how to let them go and only use emotions that are suitable for the situation. And that's a lot of training, and that's a lot of work, and that takes time. So this is where patience is important as well, and being kind to yourself in this unfolding and this understanding of these dynamics and how that unfolds in the different setups, as I talked about in the rediscovery of selfhood, within the inner child patterns, and within the rebellious teenager or whatever kind of teenager we had, and within the adolescent or the grown up, the adult in oblivion, and how these patterns also are blocking some of our inner dynamics to unfold what's really there. So the first part of the work is a lot of psychological processes, and at the same time, we have to live our lives and be around people and do all the things that we are becoming energetically sensitive to. So that's a lot. And in that, we will have to be patient as well and understand that's a lot of unfolding and new understanding and new processes and learning how to navigate, and at the same time also how to integrate it and make it part of our everyday life and the new way of perceiving the world. That's a method that we did without thinking much from the age of, literally from we were born until the age of 21. We didn't think much about how we did that. It just happened, so to speak. And now we're doing it as grown-ups. But here, instead of it just happens, some of it does, because it opens up and then we get overwhelmed and then it happens and then we'll figure out to navigate in it and evaluate afterwards and say, oops, could have done better. We look into that. We evaluate, how can I do it better next time, and envision how we would like to do it differently in a manner that is less explosive. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And we keep going with that process of iteration of doing, figuring out what went wrong in our own understanding, not necessarily with the other person, but within ourselves. This is about self-mastery. It's not about other people. They are to learn their self-mastery, but we are to learn our self-mastery in this process. So that's part of, again, this letting things unfold in an organic manner. Things have their own cycles. The emotional patterns have their own patterns that needs to be unfolded. You have a little bit there, a little bit here, and then eventually the whole pattern will unravel. And sometimes that takes years. So that we can't be ambitious. That's not helping. That's just kind of opening up for disappointment. So put the ambitions away and the whole, I should have achieved this by now, and just go into that state where you're literally talking to yourself and your field and whatever you are in the full range of all your levels, which you know from the transition sciences. And you just say to everything you are, okay, we need to figure this one out. So come on, we need to set this in motion. We need to return to the best of our abilities to who and what we used to be so we can clean out, let go. We need to integrate it into who and what I am now, because if I can't integrate it, then I can't really use it in the now. And then once it's begun its integration processes, then we understand the dynamics of the principles that it will mirror itself into reality. And then we literally talk to reality and our own field and say, once I got so far, then we begin to work with the principles. Then we begin to let them mirror back to me what it is that I need to learn. Some of it is internals, others of these dynamics will express itself in the outer reality. And then it's up to us to catch when it happens, so we're not missing that opportunity. Because half of the work that you are all engaging in is that you're doing all the right things, but you are missing the feedback loop. You are literally not paying attention to when it then surfaces. When it surfaces, either you create an explanation that doesn't match what's actually going on, or you are just brushing away and saying, that's just probably not today, not now, I'm not there. And then what you're technically doing is that big invitation you made, you're then shutting it down, because these patterns are very, very responsive to your behavior of either engaging or disengaging. And since our system is trained in disengaging over engaging, and all sorts of ways to push it away because either that's too uncomfortable or whatever it is, then that mechanism is stronger than engaging. You know, I forgot his name, the one from the Pet Detective. I forgot his Jim something. Anyways, he has this movie. It's called The Yes Man, and there's some truth in this, to be able to say yes instead of no. Invite instead of pushing away. Of course, with what we're comfortable with. And eventually, once we've done that, we also learn to what to say yes to and what not to say yes to. And then after that, we learn this whole, okay, now I explored that, then I let it go. So it's about, when do I let it come, lean in and learn about it? And once the process is done, then I need to learn to let it go so other things can come in and do the same process. So it's all about recognizing these dynamics more than the actual incidents. But that's, again, that demands a lot of training to be able to see the forest for the trees. Most people begin with seeing one branch, one leaf at a time, and that is fine until, of course, we have done it so many times, we begin to see there is some kind of pattern here. And some people don't have that pattern recognition dynamic. And that's why you then can rest on the teachings that I have put out for you, that you, as you know, can access for free, because there I try to create that pattern. Whether or not it goes through in the way you need to learn it, that's, of course, that I can't really control. I've done the best I can to create a sort of pattern and a system that makes sense. At least it made sense for me. That's not the same. It makes sense for others. So if that's the case, then it's looking at it and say, well, what can I then use from it? And if that's not of any use whatsoever, okay, then that is to sit in contemplation on the question, okay, these teachings don't really work for me. Then you can do what others have done. Oh, go out and look here and there and everywhere like a big buffet. Or you can just go in and say, okay, since this system is not really equipped to who and what I am, then ask yourself and your fields and what you're made of. Then what does work? Let's find out. What does work then? Let's invent that together. Because that's what I did. None of what I found out there worked for me, so I had to invent it all from scratch. And that's part of the process too, to move from being a follower to become an initiator. And for some that's easy, and for some that's more difficult, because that's very uncertain too. And in all of that, what holds us back most of the time is the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of what we don't know. And once you get into this open yes approach, a lot of things will come that you have no clue what to do with. That is so new that all you can do is just sit there and say, okay, I did not ask for that, but now it's here. So how do I do? How do I fix this? How do I figure this one out? And not necessarily fix it as if something's broken, but how do I learn what this is about? And that goes with a version of self-confidence, as you know from my earlier teachings, where I say, instead of saying, oh, this is overwhelming, so then say, yes, it is overwhelming. Wow, too much. But I'll figure it out. How do I take all of this mess? Like if you're going into an apartment and there's super lot of a mess everywhere, and this kind of people with ADHD, they will not have an easy time with that, because they then have projects here and have projects there and nothing gets ever completed. But the first step as envisioning all of this work is to say there's so much that is messy and chaotic, and I'll begin in one section. And then I will train the completion. I will train that section, like when you're doing the dishes. You continue until you've done all the dishes, or you continue until you have cleaned that little segment of that apartment. And not far from where I'm living, there is a house where there's lived a woman who was a hoarder, and her garden and her yard, everything is littered with all sorts of stuff. And I am pleased that I'm not the one that's cleaning that up. A new person has now moved in, whether it's a daughter or whatever it is. And it's a slow project, definitely, because when you look in the windows, everything is piled up with all sorts of stuff everywhere. So I wouldn't even know where to begin that, seriously. So that's that, but it's a good exemplification of what this work really means. It's not neat and nice and ordered and follows a specific dynamic that is cookie cutter. If only you do this, then that will unfold. But there are certain traits that can be used. There are certain dynamics that can be used. So what I'm here asking of you in this work is to become the inventor, become the scientist, and become the one that explores what your field is, and looking at it with marvel, and like the child that looks at it with the great curiosity and say, I don't know how to do this, but I'll learn as I go along. That in itself opens up to a whole other level of investigation. Instead of having the idea, I should know this because I studied it, so why doesn't it work? There you have already narrowed down the way that you're perceiving things by saying it should fit the framework I've studied. It doesn't always. But the meta dynamics, the way that the framework is, whatever type of framework you prefer, is it's valid across many different traditions. We have a physical form and we have different fields behind. We know we have the physical form, and whether you call the biofield or the morphogenetic field or the DNA template or whatever the language is, however you perceive it, there is still this understanding that behind the human cells and the human DNA and the atoms, there are fields. And these fields can be accessed with consciousness. They can be accessed by the observer that goes in and look at it, in whether it is through sound, or it's through vision, or it's through a bridge of crystals, or it's the amplification of just the human touch, or whatever it is. It's energy. And then there is the vibrational field that has been masked in emotions, whether we say that the emotional field, the vibrational field is one of the same, or we see it as a spectra of different types of expression of these type of energies. It doesn't really matter. Whatever narrative we use, if it opens up, then it opens up, and then we can work with it. And if we then discover that that narrative is not good enough, that context, that framework is not expansive enough, then we should also be ready to let that go, even though it's fear-provoking, and then begin to question, okay, I got so far with this framework. What do I then need to figure out? And again, relying less on external forces, external people that are coming up with their ideas, and relying more on your own. Trust, begin to value your own impressions, the ideas that pops up. Yes, a lot can be parasitic influences. And yes, I made all of the mistakes that you can have in any book, but I learned from it. Of course, some will get some pretty hard beating when they're doing their mistakes, and I did too. It's a miracle I even got through it. But again, that's how to learn to work with things and to trust that the system itself, once you open up to this healing process or this reconstitution process or the reconfiguration process, there are dynamics that will assist us, but are definitely also dynamics that will prohibit it and work against it. But both of them can teach us something about ourselves and the nature of reality and how the energetic realms really unfold what they hold. So my knowledge has come through experimentation and the trust that since I can't find it out there, like Steve Jobs said, if it's not out there, then make it yourself. Then I did that, and then it began to unravel and unfold, of course, via communication with different entities when I was on that level, communication with nature and devas when I was on that level, communication with trolls and whatever when I was on the astral plane, communication with different guides and whatever when I was on that level, just to strip that away and see the grays behind, and then communication with grays until I got through that level, then communication with insectoids until I got through that level, then communication with ghosts when I went to that one. So that's the multidimensional aspect of communication that kicks in. And not all have that ability. So in that I was fortunate to be able to communicate with the entities like we have communicated with humans along our processes, which we also need when we're doing psychological processes. A lot of things we can do on our own, but sometimes we have to verbalize it. We have to talk to another being that can then listen and mirror back and give this feeling of understanding while we are communicating and talking and putting things in a framework, being met and seen and heard and acknowledged. And whether it is an actual acknowledgement or it's the opposite that then puts us into a kind of defense mechanism. But all of these things teach us something. So everything is a learning lesson. Even if we are not learning anything, that's a learning lesson. Why we're not learning anything, or when we feel that we're not doing enough, then investigate that feeling of feeling not doing enough, or the feeling of I'm behind, then investigate the feeling of feeling behind. What is it that drives that feeling of feeling behind? Since that's there. So whatever pops up, meet it with curiosity and an open mind and say, okay, now you're here. Show me what it is that we are to figure out here. Show me what it is that you want to share with me. And then, is it something that needs to be transformed? Is it something that needs to be integrated? Is it something that needs to be cleared? Whatever it is that comes up in that moment, we will address it like that. And that in itself is actually the work. It's not about reaching a goal. It's not about unfolding our high order senses. Some have easier access to this than others. It is the ability to curiously investigate whatever comes our way and being open to investigate it, but also being open to feel what it does to us, to both feel what's pleasant and unpleasant, to feel what we can recognize and what we cannot recognize. And if we can't recognize it, then it's an experience of I can't recognize it. I hope you can see where I'm going here, where you take every single thing. Even here, I can ask myself the question, why am I saying what I'm saying? Why is that coming out of my mouth? What's the purpose of that? So I do that investigation all the time, and I'm kind of the observer all the time of whatever comes out my mouth. Does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Where do I need to go with this? So my brain is used to work on these multiple levels all the time, put in boxes and figure out what it was. And those of you who've been with me for years, you remember what I said years ago and how all over the place it was, and how I become more, as I understood more and more, began to put it in their separate boxes and figure out, oh, this belongs here and that belongs there, and that's what this is about, and understanding these dynamics. And some things I talked about years ago, I don't talk about it anymore because I'm now in a different dimension. I'm working through the dimensions of our reality, whether it's the dimensions of the underworld or the dimensions behind physicality or the dimensions as part of the emotional field. All of these are dimensions They are dimensions, that means aspects of our reality that we can investigate. And the more curious we are, the more information we will get. That's an old saying, ask and you shall be given, right? And it's not about wanting things that are materialistic and are tied into greed or whatever, but we can also get greedy when we are becoming investigative for more knowledge. Then it won't reflect, because these dynamics are a kind of a dynamic that rests upon harmony, that rests upon progression dynamics, that rests upon the willingness to become whole. It doesn't rest upon the willingness for more, or because of greed or ambition or whatever. It kind of stops right there. It's like the vibration is just not unfolding anything. On the contrary, it contracts it. The moment greed is involved, the moment we use crystals for because I want to earn more money or whatever it is, it's greed. And the system itself is not unfolding its capacity. The vibration of that is inward service to self. It collapses the pattern right away. The probabilities does never unfold or never get the chance to unfold because it's collapsed within a framework of service to self and greed from the get-go. So of course it doesn't work, especially when we're talking about the progression dynamics in the original solar system civilizations. I think that's kind of what I wanted to say here, more or less.